Hello, this is Crisis of Infinite Opinions. I am your host, Honey. This is the show where all four of us will be gathered together to share their opinions on certain topics, but one of us is secretly a bizarro with the wrong take. My left is DinoMightyMiranda.
I'm DinoMightyMiranda on TikTok. I'm your friendly neighborhood amateur Batman historian. Happy to be here.
Below me is Rockstar Free.
Hi, my name's Rena. I make way too long videos on way too short a platform.
And down there below is Knight.
My name is Knight the Werewolf Teacher, and you can find me on TikTok there, where I am a fake werewolf and real teacher.
Today's topic that we will be discussing is civilian love interests, and civilian side characters in general, and the relationship between superheroes and supporting characters. Should there be more non-superpowered supporting characters or civilian side characters in superhero comics?
I've been thinking about this ever since, because it's been a couple weeks, and between reading current books and reading previous books, I kind of think that when you have a civilian, it's kind of boring, because I've been reading Star Sapphires as of recently, and every Star Sapphire story, it's weird because it's Carol doing something, you know, and it's this interesting evolution of Doiby, who was Alan Scott's sidekick that didn't really do stuff, and then to Carol, and it's just kind of I noticed that in modern Green Lantern stories, it's all space, and that's because they didn't give the humans much to do. They were just normal people. Or I look at Blue Beetle, who I said lived not ready yet, and it's the reason why Blue Beetle got this is because they threw Starfire in there, right? It was during the DC Robin, and just kind of this idea of I think we are at a point where we don't really need a character that's just from another genre, you know. You don't need interest that's just the same from a soap opera or whatever. We're a superhero universe. They should have some connections to superheroes.
I acknowledge your point about how these are superhero books. We're reading them for the superhero genre. If you add too many civilian friends, you can fall into the trap of just having a weird teenage soap opera in the middle of your superhero book. But I really enjoy world building, and that's what I think civilians help add to the mix, because when you have all superhero characters, then everybody's already living in this zany world. Whereas if you just have a guy, right? If you just have Jeff, who is the best friends to so-and-so, then all of a sudden you get to see what the superhero world is like through Jeff's point of view. What does going to school look like when there's a Brainiac invasion? What does insurance look like when Lex Luthor has a tantrum because he can't throw a car as far as Superman, right? And that is really interesting to me. I like that kind of drama in a superhero book.
We've talked about this on our own a number of times, and I think that the amount of side characters we have is about right now. I think we're at a decent spot, but I do find they kind of distract from part of the storytelling. I was just thinking about the recent Hellblazer, and what I think is interesting there, Constantine, despite being the main character and despite being involved, really barely has any powers, and so throwing in a bunch of side characters there ends up having a bunch of people who are less involved in the story, but also are just as likely to get hurt by all of the stuff that Constantine is bringing in. While they do give you that weird perspective, they don't help you understand more. They add to the confusion. They can get in the way, I think. A lot.
I'm very much in the pro side of things when it comes to civilian characters, primarily because a lot of my favorite comics that I remember and read a lot of the time are Blue Devil, which is almost exclusively just supporting characters being the driving motivations for the characters, or Englehart's Batman, or the late 80s Superman stuff, where almost all of the conflict in the story is driven by the supporting cast having their own corners of the world that they pull the hero into. Batman solving a plot involving the political election only really has a big narrative weight because we have characters who are in Gotham's government, who can be pulled in to pull Batman into the story, who could be the audience POV for the scene or something before we actually pull Batman in. Or Blue Devil being pulled into a conflict because his best friend is an asshole who keeps getting into all kinds of problems. It's these characters, when it's just the hero and just the villains who attack him and attack his city, it becomes very monotonous. Like, oh, why are we fighting a problem this time? Well, an alien attacked the city. It leads to very stagnant stories, in my opinion.
So, like, here's my thing. I think there's an aspect of inevitability to all this. When I think about, like, a supporting character who has, like, being, like, in it, my immediate thoughts are, like, the love interest, like, specifically Lois Lane in the park, who Linda inevitably just became, like, a member of the hero unit, as did, like, Lois for a bit. Like, Lois got her own book. And I think this is just more of, like, a practical understanding of the way it works. We talked about Batman, but, like, there's a reason why the two love interests that people talk about with Batman are Talia and Selina, and also that Talia has aggressively become more involved in the Liquid Shadows. I think it's just kind of, you can have that personally driven stories without them literally just being like a normal person. I think a lot about like Green Lantern's book I really like, and those are each other's supporting like cast. That's like a partnership.
I have to disagree there on the Batman stuff, just because I love the Silver St. Cloud dynamic. I love the Julie Madison. All of my favorite Batman love interests are the civilian love interests.
But I think you have a limit to how popular you can be with that. And that's not even just like particular comics in the modern day thing. That's like Alex God of the Silver Age has like love interests that are nobodies that like own horses, and then like Harley Quinn comes along and like that's his like wife that he sacrifices herself to. That's a whole 90s thing. That's been in my brain ever since.
I will say, I think there's a little bit of a conflating when you mentioned Lois Lane getting her own book as sort of a natural evolution, but like being the protagonist of a story doesn't mean you're not still a civilian or a civilian love interest in that dynamic. She's still, for the majority of Lois Lane's whole history, being just a civilian.
I think it's touch and go for a bit. She gets into pretty like super heroic adventures, and then she eventually gets back to like a normal level, you know? There's that. Admittedly, she like dies soon after in the New 52 when she gets powers. Wait, no, she gets powers before in a different way. The New 52 with Lois is weird, but
well, the New 52 is weird. So
yeah, I generally think Lois is the exception to every rule, though. Like I think about Invincible. This isn't just DC. We talk a lot about DC, and there's literally that bit in Invincible where, spoilers for the comic book, like there's this big point in which Amber tries very hard to make it work, and it falls apart because she's not a hero, but it works with Eve because she is a hero. There's that kind of disconnect, I think.
So I was going to add on to Rena's point. I think that there is an ickiness that comes with the civilian love interest in that they aren't as powerful or aren't as competent as the superhero protagonist, and so a lot of people tend to gravitate toward Catwoman and Talia because they can hold their own in a physical sphere. You know?
Like, for the longest time, this was sort of a critique people had of, like, Mary Jane, that, oh, she doesn't actually, like, derive the story or anything, she doesn't have a lot of agency, she's just a pretty face, but, like, she's still Peter Parker's most beloved love interest character for the whole time, and she has some of the most interesting stories when she's with Peter Parker. And it's just like, just because she doesn't have like physical or like direct agency over the plot, like making decisions all the time, like she's not a main character, she's a supporting character. Of course she's not going to have main character actions to drive the story.
Mary Jane hasn't done anything meaningfully in the Spider-Man book in like 30 years is the thing.
To be fair, they've also have not been together in like 20 years.
But like the reason why they're not together anymore is because when you read the 90s books, they don't know what to do with her other than like be pregnant and a model. Like those are the two things they do with her. And like I generally think that's what I'm talking about, where there's like a plateau, right? Where like in any other genre, a supporting character, even if they're not the protagonist, is going to get more involved with time. But again, unless you're like Lois Lane, there is a natural like ceiling to how involved a supporting character can
I think people think there is still a wall with this villain, with the superhero love interest as well. Like, people think like, oh, Catwoman is naturally like such a great love interest for Batman, but when have Catwoman and Batman actually maintained a consistent romance for more than like 5 years? There's not, like, they keep breaking them up because they realize as soon as they actually get together, there's a ceiling to that relationship, and there's just, in superhero comics in general, there's a ceiling to when civilian love interest stories can really grow.
So, like, with the whole civilian love interest dynamic, I think part of the problem is how people consider characters, right? Is that when we're talking about DC and Marvel specifically, those are franchise characters, right? Like, those are characters that don't just exist in a single book written by a single writer for a single set period of time. And so there's, I think, a lot more room to take a supporting character and to give them the potential of, like, a limited series, or to have them show up in another book, in, like, a team book. And so it is, I think, like, part of the limitation is when you think of a civilian character as completely limited to the superhero main character that they're connected to, because they're not, right? Like, they are in the sense of that is how they are being utilized, but they're not in the sense of they are real people in the context of the story, and this is a real universe, right? So there's no reason why you can't take that character and use them somewhere else. And that is really interesting to me, and I think, like, that is something that can be explored when you have, like, large supporting casts of civilian characters, right? Like, they don't, you know, you don't have to have a situation where it's like Jeff, professional best friend, but you can have a situation where, you know, Jeff, who is the supporting character in the superhero book, ends up in, like, an anthology book set within the city that Jeff lives in. I'm using Jeff because I had a teacher who would explain, like, Shakespeare with a made-up character named Jeff.
Gotcha.
Now it's just stuck in my brain.
I remember back, like, last June, I counted how many books had Batman in the title or Batman in the cover, just Batman, not even any of the other Bat people. And this was when he was dead. And it was, like, 16 out of, like, 30, I think, or 30-something. And, like, those are books that are just coming out. And, like, not every character is Batman, you know? But, like, I can buy, to me, a Robin, Catwoman, even like a minor character, even like my brain's just gonna come back to it, a Star Sapphire, appearing in, like, multiple books at once. It's a little, and, like, even with, like, the Jeff thing, I think it's kind of, we don't have anthologies anymore, sadly. Like, that's a thing we do. Like, unless it's Gotham, it's just like a no. We can't even get Alan Scott to really appear in a Gotham book. Like, which is weird, but whatever. Like, I think it's just, I think support, every time we talk about, like, the capacity for a civilian character, it's like an uphill battle, and it requires context that comics just don't really exist in anymore.
Right.
It's like how in Hollywood, you don't really have those big budget productions anymore. You either have blockbusters or smaller things. Similarly, I just don't think you're ever going to get Scrim Powell's Jimmy Olsen introducing Dark Side of all characters, or, like, Superman's girlfriend Lois. Like, you're not gonna, like, get that, I don't think. And I think you're gonna end up much more to, like, the Gold Age, where the Alan Scott's around just because Joyby got an inheritance letter, and, like, that's the plot now. Like, I just don't think we have room for this kind of stuff. Characters kind of have to pull their own weight, you know?
I get
Thinking
that.
about it a couple years ago, they came out with a one-shot, Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen's boss, Perry White. Like, that is just so ridiculous, because it just keeps on going. We just keep getting more granular and granular.
No, it should be Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen's boss, Perry White's ace reporter, Lois Lane's fiance, Clark Kent.
That's it. That's the pitch. You need to send that right in.
I would love if it's just, like, a normal Superman story, but, like, whenever Clark turns into Superman, the story abruptly, like, stops. Like, you do a little time skip.
We just make it black enough, and Henry's back.
It's Perry being like, Kent, like, I need you to cover this story, and he's like, sure.
Now, we did bring up the idea of, before we started this video, about the power imbalances that actually exist between hero and civilians when they have a relationship. And since we've been talking a lot about civilian love interests as the primary type of civilian character, how do we actually feel about civilian love interests as a concept beyond their main character statuses?
So, honey, me and you, I think, are of one mind on this. But before that, I have to rant real quick because I keep on mentioning her. Star Sapphire, what the hell? Because, look, a real Star Sapphire story, great. I love that dynamic. Is it a good story? No. But whatever. Then they move to this weird dynamic where Sapphire is basically an alternate personality who really, really wants to marry Hal Jordan, which is the exact opposite of what it was, but whatever. And that's the key element of imbalance, right? Where Hal Jordan has all the information and Carol Ferris is pining after both identities and both doesn't know what his secret identity is in either of them and doesn't know that she has this rival for affection. It's all of the information, and it's gross, and it comes up, and it's gross, and it gets worse with every single book. Why is Star Sapphire was supposed to be a personality that fucking hated Hal Jordan? That was the shtick. Carol Ferris wanted to date Hal Jordan for reasons that only God knows, and then Star Sapphire was but why though? And wasn't even a real personality. It was basically just a voice changer. But now we're to actually every person who looks like Carol Ferris really wants to date Green Lantern because they're genetically predisposed to liking Hal Jordan, which honestly I guess would be an explanation for why Hal wants to date.
Yeah,
Civilian love interests. I think if you are a boyfriend girlfriend and you're keeping the secret about your super secret identity, that's fine. That's whatever. That's a relationship that is still
awesome.
It's not. I don't want to say it's not serious because there's a lot of people that date for years and they still use the term boyfriend girlfriend, right? And I don't want to take away from that, but I want to say if you're still if you're casually dating, if you're at the level of dating where you see each other twice a week and that's it, then that's whatever. You do not need to tell that person that you're a superhero. But I think the moment it becomes more serious, the moment you are living together, you are getting dogs together, or discussing lifelong commitments, then at that point it becomes super unethical to keep that secret because people have the right to make decisions with all of the information, and you don't owe people personal information. But I view being a superhero as being a job. If you are a firefighter, you should not get into a serious relationship without telling your partner you're a firefighter, right? Because there's certain that it's going to affect how they live their life, right? And so I do view that there is an ethical concern when a superhero relationship gets serious and they do not tell their partner that they have a cape hidden under their bed.
I will say that a large part of the major, the idea of secret identity love interest stuff is a dying art. That's very few characters, if ever, get established nowadays who have that dynamic. But the ones that were core in the original back in the day were primarily Superman and Lois Lane and Batman and Vicky Vale. That was the two primary instances of a civilian love interest and who is trying to uncover the secret identity of their partner, who is not actually kind of dating them, more just the sort of friend because we got to keep everything PG and not actually have any on-screen romance. But in both those situations, neither of the men, especially because they are not actually dating these women a lot of the time, are just having their privacy invaded by these women who are in their lives. There's a great moment in Englehart's Batman run in the late 70s, where he runs into Vicky Vale again, and they're considering getting into a relationship again, and he just remembers the hell she put him through back in the 50s about constantly pestering him about his secret identity and he almost resents Vicky at that point and doesn't end up pursuing a relationship with her because of all of the resentment he has over her not giving him the shreddest bit of privacy. And honestly, and considering all the shit Lois Lane was up to all the time trying to force and coerce Superman into giving up his secret identity, I have a hard time believing that these women even deserve to know the secret identities of these characters, especially since they're not actually dating a lot of the time.
I think this stems from like it being a dying art means it has a lot of boomerisms in it that would not be happening if we actually tried to write it nowadays, where like there's this general issue of like at the time it's reasonable to just actually be leading a set across from your wife, you know? Like there's that generally like badgering animosity that we see in a lot of media about relationships. And I think that is not an inherent element to secret identity shenanigans. Secret identity shenanigans can be fun. They just aren't when they're old. And I think for me, I agree with Miranda to a point, because I think for one, I think a superhero identity is so much more than a job for a couple. One, it is like a full-on identity. I think about those disconnected panels of superheroes doing therapy that aren't connected to a greater story by Tom King, in which Superman basically talks about like how he doesn't know who he is because like he lived a life as Clark Kent and he created Superman, who is a lot of what he wants to do and live up to as Clark Kent. But because of that, he changed his Clark Kent persona. Like the bumbling oaf that wears glasses isn't really who Clark was back in Smallville, but also Superman isn't Clark as he was in Smallville either. So like, where did Clark go? And like, I think about that when like that can be done well, like in those 9 panels, or it could be done poorly, like Grant Morrison deciding that that Batman actually has DID, but it's super smart DID that he self-consciously put in his brain. But either way, there is this element of like, it is more than a job, it is a life. Like in Silver Age Green Lantern, Hal Jordan is going on dates as Green Lantern, right? Like he is a public figure. He is like a celebrity that he isn't for Hal Jordan. And I think in that context, I think there's a threshold in every relationship where like this is untenable. But I do think this is much more about like, I think about the Invincible show, spoilers for the show now, and how like the big problem that fucking everyone who watches it apparently didn't get because they hate Black women was that like Amber's problem was not that Mark didn't tell her secret identity. It was that it was obvious that Mark was keeping a secret from her, and it was an insult to both her intelligence and the commitment to her relationship that he was doing so, right? Like if this was any other, like if Mark didn't need to divulge his secret identity, but he couldn't have his cake too. Like he either needed to respect that Amber had specific time commitments and specific expectations for a relationship that was getting serious, or he needed to stop dating, right? And it's reasonable for it is reasonable for her to have those expectations. It's reasonable for him to not meet them, but it's not reasonable for them to continue dating fast.
I agree. And also there's the factor of like, we're both trans women here, and the situation, a lot of people who are trans don't feel safe entering a relationship admitting to being trans just because they're worried about like what will happen to them if they tell them that case. And then there becomes the ugly question of, well, if I'm not going to tell them immediately on the first date, when is the appropriate time to tell them? And that's not a fixed answer that you can end up saying, especially if you aren't sure or aren't comfortable yet. Like, you like them, but you don't know that if you tell them this truth, they might see you differently. Like, oh, I'm a superhero, and that's a great thing, but this person might have different, like, you might be Peter Parker and dating the daughter of a police chief who actively doesn't like criminals, and it's like, do I tell her that I'm a superhero? I don't know. And then she gets her back snapped, so she doesn't have to know.
So going down to the appropriate time to tell someone, like Miranda had said, like once you're really like considering like staying with a person for ever, whether marriage or not, I do think that is a good rule. I also think, generally speaking, if you're dating, after the second kidnapping, all right. So look, the first kidnapping, it's not that anyone can get kidnapped by a supervillain.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like people bring up,
they're like, I know this person will save this person.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing.
Yeah,
I think
that's a criticism I have of people who bring up like a criticism I have of other people's criticisms where they say like, oh, MJ gets kidnapped every other week. There's probably like people all over New York City who are getting kidnapped by supervillains. You know what? All those people don't have a superhero boyfriend to go and rescue them. Most of them are probably dead in a ditch.
But like there are not that many kidnappings in New York City, but. I do think, this is the resident. Rena reminds everyone she's a New Yorker because it's required on film every time I'm here. But I do think like that there's like two differences, I think, to like the trans allegory. One is there's like a real risk of danger for the person involved, right? There's like a real chance that you're like, okay, maybe I'll tell her she's Spider-Man when we move in, and then you're packing boxes, and then you have to go leave, and then you get like shot, and then she just never does, right? Because you end up in a ditch somewhere. And like I think that is like Miranda said, that's like a real risk in the relationship, right? You don't have the full information that's required. The other difference is I think it is way less tenable if they know you deeply on both sides. Now, this isn't a Vicky Vale Lawson situation where they're basically a stalker in like invading your privacy every other time. But like if you're in a example Hal Jordan dynamic where she's literally dating both of you, maybe up at a certain point. And like it's notable that by the end of the 60s, they've changed the dynamic so that she's not interested in it. Like the beginning of the dynamic, Hal is actively using the fact that he's Green Lantern to get in on Carol Ferris because Carol wants to date Hal Jordan, but she can't because he's an employee. To the point where he says yes to a date in both identities with her, like a triple date, because it's the only way she'll agree to date Hal Jordan. And then they go nowhere fast. And I'm going to be mad until like the day I die. DC needs to write me a story where both Hal Jordan and Green Lantern date Carol Ferris at time. That is the only story I will accept in which the two of them date, because my god, girl, just like go to therapy. Tangent here. Yes. Secret identity. Hal Jordan Star Sapphire is the worst of the bunch. All right. Here's the thing. Hal Jordan also does that. The classic. There's gonna be a final chance, Hal, and you'll break that too, and I can't handle the disappointment. And then they still get together at the end of that story arc, but whatever. Because like that's a person who is also a superhero who is telling you you're doing too much. Like you're bad at this. And it's proof that like this isn't a superhero problem, it's a you problem. Yeah. But I think like for me, this circles back to what we were talking about, where like understanding expectations, right? Where like in Invincible Season 2, the two of them are doing great because they both have reasonable expectations for each other, right? Like if anything, Mark has only taken on more responsibility since Season 1, but he knows his limitations and he's being honest about them. And similarly speaking, there's like superheroes who like are perfectly fine with you running out to go save a day. And then there's Carol Ferris, who is upset that Hal stopped the missile that he saw because they were kissing and that meant his eyes were open during the kiss. Which like...
And then there's Peter Parker's many times where he will sabotage his own relationships and romances because he has responsibility to go be Spider-Man when... You're in New York City, the most superhero populated place in the entire world. If you're not there immediately to stop the bank robbers, Thor will pop up to stop the bank robbers. Go on your fucking date.
X-Men will travel from Westchester to go stop a robbery. Like, you don't need to do that. I think about in the PS4 game, which you shouldn't play, when the scene like that everyone like posts videos of because they're in like the Spider-Punk suit or the undies suit in which they're about to like have dumplings and they hear police sirens and Peter's like, oh, and she's like, did you leave your clothes on like my kitchen floor? And like the fact that I can't record a video without hearing sirens at a certain point. Like you don't need to jump every time the police decide to harass a teenager. Like it's fine. Like you don't need to. Honestly, that would be great if this was a version of Spider-Man who would like harass the police for it, you know? Yeah. But
I'm addicted to harassing the cops. Already on it. I have to go to this crime scene because the cops are going to be there, and I have to punk eggs at the cops. You don't understand. This is my job.
At that point, just marry him. MJ, he's doing the right thing. But like, I'm trying to think of an example because there are examples of like people who are perfectly fine with that, right? Who will give you food and you can go on day, and that's fine. And I think for me, like one of this is like a problem with like, again, I think civilian characters will always have a disconnect, like it's the kind of thing when your spouse is just not interested in your hobbies and like has trouble getting into it. And I think like I don't know how tenable that can be if you always prom, and it seems incredibly common. I do think I prefer when the hero has an issue that has like is unreasonable than when the spouse is unreasonable, right? Because it's just funnier. Okay, when the spouse is unreasonable, it's like, okay, you're dragging me down. When the hero's unreasonable, I'm like, okay, this is hilarious. Because like, do you really not see the problem with like running out on your wedding to go stop an alien invasion when like all your friends are there and they're also superheroes? Like
one of the
Well, that's where like my thing about understanding characters as people outside of the context of like the main character they're connected to, right? Because if the civilian love interest has their own interests and thing, then they don't need to like sit at home and obsess about like when Peter Parker is gonna come back to finish the dumplings that are getting cold on the table. They can be like, cool, I'm gonna go wash my soap.
You know what the natural evolution of that is? Villain love interest. Which naturally, if they have respect for each other and are good, will always have that. Because when they're doing their own thing, they'll still meet up with their significant other, just in a different way, right? Like, it's so easy to do. I'm talking Green Lantern, Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn's actually working for the FBI, pretending to be a supervillain. Like, you can just, like, you don't need to do that. And like Molly will like be Molly, where she's like, I don't really want to be like costumed right now. I'm gonna go watch your horse while you go do stuff, right? Or your dog, just like doing her own thing, right? And like it's so easy to do that when you're like a supervillain, because like then you can just fly to another city. But like when you're if you're a reporter who's always covering the Batman case, once you discover who the Batman is and you're like, oh, I can't reveal who the Batman is now, what are you supposed to do? If you don't want to cover Superman, well, you can't go home and hang out with your husband because he's Superman. He's currently doing shit. Like when it's a double duty where both your job and your husband are doing the same thing. Like you're like, well, I guess I'll finish the dumplings, and then you get a call and you're like, well, I guess I'm not finishing the dumplings.
This is why I actually really like Mary Jane being a model and actress who has like her entire life has nothing actually to do with Peter Parker as a character. Where it's just like, oh, what is Mary Jane doing while Peter Parker's out? Well, she could just be sitting on the couch looking hot as balls, or she could go to the photo shoot to do some improv photos with her photographer, or she might already have a scheduled acting gig or an audition for a role in a movie that she's just gonna head over to. Like, she has her own life that she just happens
to more compelling life than Peter Parker.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I want to offer a different take with the married to the job aspect, right? So I think so I have a co-worker, not co-teacher, I don't work with him right now, who was a lawyer, right? And when he was asked why he stopped being a lawyer to become a teacher, he said, if I had stayed a lawyer, I'd be divorced 2 or 3 times by now. So like in real life, I think it is entirely okay to say, hey, for there to be an aspect of married to the job being a stressor in the relationship. But in storytelling, it drives me up the wall. And I think part of it is also because like there is the aspect of you're saving lives.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a difference between between my coworker billing his client for hours, you know, and doing more work just to get ahead in a law firm than, you know, a superhero who's like, hey, there's a missile about to hit the city. I need to go stop that or hundreds of people will die.
Like, yeah, I mean, here's my thing here.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, you go, Miranda. I'm talking about it.
Well, I was gonna say, like, with that, I think there is like, I think an element of like, you know, that boomerism with it is that a lot of the times when you have the conflict of the superhero, quote unquote, like overworking and then like the partner feeling neglected, they paint it as though the partner is just like batshit and like the most irrational person on earth. when it's like, no, like there's actual critiques, right? You can make about that, you know, of like if your job is Superman, right? Your job is to save shit, right? At what point do you clock out, and then what is the threat level that gets you to clock back in, even in like your quote unquote off hours, right? Like that's a conversation that actual couples would have, but the writers are like get too invested in that my nag wife joke.
Yes,
and,
like
the partner becomes off crazy.
It's like where they put like, oh, the mere act of being a superhero inherently trumps any relationship I'll ever have. But it's just like, all right, going to stop the supervillain that is attacking the city right this second. Yeah, I understand that. Going to like stop having dinner with me because you need to go patrol the city streets. That's an entirely different concept.
That's just a scheduling like, right? Like, don't schedule your dinner dates during patrol hours. But yeah.
I think a story I would actually like to see with that married to the job aspect is like, you are overworking yourself. You are going to if you keep doing this right the way you are, you're going to get sloppy and you're going to get killed. But I don't think I don't think I've ever seen that aspect of married to the job done.
In CW Black Lightning, I'm so sorry, honey. There, Jennifer, who's an actress.
People are gonna have the wrong intonation from that response.
So like in Jennifer's an actual character and does more shit than Jefferson Pierce. Is like does divorce him before the show starts explicitly because she spent too many times bandaging up bullet wounds, and it's like, we have 2 kids, Jeff. I'm not gonna be here when you bite it. You need to quit being Black Lightning. But I think for me, I think there's a couple statements I want to say here, which is the reason why I think what Miranda's talking about happens is because when characters are built to be love interests and supporting characters, there's a sense of inevitability that writers have compared to if you create a character for another reason, like being another superhero, another villain about their own book. That inevitability isn't seen, right? You picture this character not first as a supporting character for another book, but as their own entity. And so you already like jump the problem that Miranda's been talking about in the podcast. The other thing I have to say, because I always think of superheroing as like a volunteer firefighter type thing, right? And there is a situation where you just can't say no, right? Where like if you are like in a place where there's no alternative options and you're the kind of person who like does it for the love of the game, you're just not gonna say no. And I do think like there's like bad writing where it's like, yeah, if you put your character in a busy metropolis, whether it be literally Metropolis or the place Metropolis is partially based on, and you have a whole bunch of other superheroes, like, you know, we never see Superman go to the suicide slums, but whatever.
That's Black Lightning's job.
Yeah, like you have this. If you have that element, then like that's a problem. But if you have a superhero that's just like, Batman is created as a character who will never say no, right? Like, he does not start tackling supervillains. He starts tackling small-time crooks and organized like crime. So like he is attached to all crime in Gotham, and he's take a rest, take a rats. So that's a character who is like, yeah, it's kind of like the volunteer firefighter scenario where it's like you wouldn't, like, if you live in a small enough place that just is very fire prone, are you going to say no at any point? And like, what's the answer in that dynamic? And you know what the answer could be?
But also there's the, like, why people make the joke of why does the GCPD even exist if Batman's going to solve every fucking crime? But if the GCPD actually did retire and Batman became the sole protector of Gotham, solving every fucking crime in Gotham, that would just escalate all of Batman's responsibilities at all points. If Superman suddenly he became the only superhero of Metropolis, there was no gangbuster, there was no Black Lightning, no one around there, no science police, no special crimes unit, and it was just Superman in Metropolis, he would never have a personal life. And that's an interesting question to explore of how effective should the superhero be to the point that the police force and the security officers and all that type of stuff working in the city just stop coming into work because they know the hero is just going to do the job for them.
I'm reminded of an opposite sort of situation that happened in Supergirl, where Cat Grant suspects that Kara is Supergirl. So she fires Kara saying, no, you have to be Supergirl full time. Why are you wasting 8 hours of your day here?
Because she needs to eat. Oh, like she doesn't need meat. Never mind. But I have like a lot of things. One, the reason why the GCPD still exists is because it's a protection racket. That's the reason. It's a terrible police department. It's the worst police department ever. Two, at least in DC America. Two, I think about the time in which Supergirl literally did do that for Gotham, like for one day, like made CPD didn't need to do their on the books job and could focus on their actual job, which is ruining Gotham. And then the other things I have to say, one, a book that does do that is Spider-Man, where Peter kills himself, like just because he's self-destructive, because his sorts of responsibility is based off of anguish. But the other things are, what would be a really easy solution to that, and making sure you had other heroes on the job? Superhero family, rather than dating Lois Lane. You had a Catwoman who also, or you dated New 52 of Lois Lane.
Well, I wanted to bring up the dynamic that J. Jonah Jameson would not work as a supporting character in Peter Parker's comics if he was a superpowered threat who could fight his own battles. The fact that he is just a tiny little man who is just there to yell words at Spider-Man and get the public to dissent means that if Peter Parker ever physically fights him, he proves Jay right, and also invalidates everything that Peter Parker stands for. The fact that he is forced to but this wouldn't work if he was actually somebody Peter Parker could punch and be okay with. The fact that he's that there are supporting characters who are allowed to push or drive the protagonist in ways because they can't physically exert their power on them is a very specific dynamic that only works with civilian characters.
Well,
I think they don't always have to be civilian characters, though, because I think that also describes my favorite dynamic of Lex Luthor. Because I like him best when he is financing the villains.
Yeah.
Where he is the villain with good publicity. Where he is selling the public on things that are definitely bad.
I don't want to conflate non-civilian with superpowered or even necessarily super. I think what I would define as civilian character, I don't even know, because there are characters like Vicky Vale and Lois Lane are as much to Superman as they are Clark Kent. But I think there's certain characters who are defined by their I guess just kind of can carry the book, right? That I would be interested in stories about. And look, any idea can have a good enough writer attached to it. That's how I feel about Judy Garrick. But I think that you can still review this potential and the power of this writer could be better utilized elsewhere. And I'm not going to say there's never been a good story with a civilian character, but what we would lose with that dynamic, does it outweigh the game? I'm thinking of Peter Parker's sister, which is a very not superpowered character, but does nonsense and has the capacity to be with Spider-Man.
I don't consider Peter Parker's sister to be a civilian character because she does not exist as a civilian in any context. She only exists for the adventure of the story in and of itself.
But that's my point. Because she's not a civilian character, she has more potential than, say...
Does she, though? Peter Parker's sister is such a boring concept.
The writers who've been given are bad. But if you were to give her the same... I'd rather read those adventures than the 90s Mary Jane adventures. Where it's Spider-Man has an existential crisis and it's moody. Mary Jane goes shopping.
I don't know. I would love to read more stories about Bibbo Babowski. He was a fun character.
You
don't know who Bibbo Babowski is?
I don't know.
Bibbo Babowski is a random 90s Superman supporting character who is just, what if Popeye ran a bar? And he's the president of the Superman fan club, and he's just an amazing character, and he's awesome, and I love him.
Yeah, but Guy Gardner ran a bar.
Superman's best pal, Jimmy Olsen's boss, Perry White's favorite diner's owner, Bibbo Babowski.
Full circle! It came full circle!
And then you just rewind it to, subject of his fan club, and then you...
Yeah.
What were you saying, Rena? You looked like you were gonna load.
So, on, the subject of civilian characters, Tim, as Robin, had a 16-year comic series that was just as invested in what the fuck he was doing as Tim Drake as it was invested in what the fuck he's doing as Robin. And that is something that I think is really missing. Like that idea that like even if you're a super person, even if you've got like super sweet martial arts skills and detective skills, you still have to do other things. Like you still have a D&D group that complains because you keep rescheduling on them. You still
even if you have superpowers, you can still be filled with toxic masculinity and ruin every social interaction you have.
No, but like civilians are
only 50%. Some of the social interactions were ruined by Batman.
But you know who came out of that series? Spoiler, because she could do other things. Like after the Robin series ended, none of those characters did anything until Tim got a boyfriend and it was a completely different character. Interesting elements of it. Like, I think that's the issue, right? Like, but we talked about all of these great things films do, but they don't do them. Is the thing.
I to your point about Bernard, I feel like people no, actually, there would still be a whole bunch of people angry about him being bi, but I feel like maybe slightly less of them would be upset if he were dating someone more interesting than Bernard Dowd.
I agree. Because
no, to be fair, Tim deserves somebody as basic as Bernard Brown.
I think no one deserves Tim Drake is the thing.
No one deserves Tim Drake.
So I agree with Wolf because there's a couple changes here. One, Tim's books would be better. Two, Tim would be better to like not need to justify it. Three, the Tim fans who have to pretend Bernard is a character would be way less. And
I will say the distinct lack of civilian supporting characters development has basically made Batman's Bruce Wayne persona irrelevant. Like, the reason we never see Bruce Wayne's public persona anymore is there's no civilian characters to tell those stories with. That because they focus exclusively on Batman and Batman's villains and Batman's rogues gallery and superheroes who are fighting him, there's no reason to ever tell a Bruce Wayne story because he has no civilian characters to interact with Bruce Wayne. All right.
Yeah.
So that was Crisis of Infinite Opinions. Were any of us actually the Bizarro again this time around?
And then a dramatic drum roll and reveal.
Drum roll.
But like,
now first guessing.
Yeah, first guessing. I'm going to guess because everyone seemed to have coherent, actual opinions that modeled with their perspectives. That we didn't get a Bizarro at all. Everyone was fine.
I'm guessing Rena actually. I mean, the Doiby hate was accurate to what I know of her, but she's been liking like a lot of like the soap opera-y aspects of Alan Scott Green Lantern, and I'm like, I think that's more like it's likely that she's a Bizarro here.
I don't think anyone is a Bizarro. I agree with Honey on this. I think I think given the tangents we have, people slip if that was the case a bit more. Miranda, do you have any guesses?
I think Knight was a Bizarro.
All right.
It's just vibes. I have no coherent reason why. I just have like a feeling.
All right. Well, all right. Will the real Bizarro please stand up? Will the real Bizarro please stand up?
Oh, yeah, I'm not standing. Bizarro! I was Bizarroing. Was anyone else?
Oh, I just shouted at the top of my lungs, me am Bizarro.
So you're not Bizarro.
No, that's how he says.
Okay, high five. You did a very good job. I didn't notice.
I did not notice either of you were the Bizarros. I was worried we were going to have an episode with no Bizarros again. I was be like, should we even have this as the premise? Would you two like to give your actual opinions on this matter this time around then?
I really need to. I think I let my opinion slip when I said, like, I think any idea is accessible, but, like, writers don't, like... You can make any idea good that doesn't really tell you about the quality of the idea. You just slap a good enough writer on. but the entire video I was talking about how like civilian characters have potential, but they're not using, which are two directly contradictory opinions. And like, my God, I was playing the role of someone I hate because like, my God, I've been talking about Carol Ferris, right? And becoming Carol Ferris, the first time was good for Carol. Becoming Star Sapphire was good for Carol Ferris once, and never again. Like,
that's what part made me think that you were just not the Bizarro. I thought that your Carol Ferris stuff was just too close to the chest.
Like, I agree, but I feel like that. Sorry, Fred.
Oh, I very much was like, I mean, that isn't the take I've ever had on Star Sapphire, but if that's what she's reading into it, she's the expert.
No, I'm not the expert in Star Sapphire. I feel like my Carol Ferris opinion is generally correct in terms of like what I believe. The degradation of the reality, and the fact that the original Star Sapphire definitely represents a dislike of Hal Jordan, and all the problems with that. I don't think that squares the circle disliking the two, like disliking it, right? Like, I think, generally speaking, the way I approach this, because I could not control myself, it's saying real opinions, and then being like, but that means completely nonsensical stuff, because I did debate, so...
A very effective bait. And you, Knight?
Yeah, so for me, I had to like walk back some at the beginning. I walked back a couple of things that I had previously said so that I could actually take this position, because we've gotten into whole conversations about the lack of respect that Tom Taylor has for Bia in like taking her from this great civilian love interest who owns and operates a bar and helps the homeless in Bloodhaven, and being like, well, that all is explained by the fact that she's actually secretly a pirate queen.
I think I just didn't get the vibe that you were anti-civilian too much in that. No?
To be fair, Knight spends too much time trying to be nuanced on their opinions that it's hard to have like a hardline stance when they give their initial opening statements.
This is true. Yeah, like where I'm like, it gets in the way. I actually would. I really love in comics where you have like the A storyline, like the B story is following the civilian side character, and they're going about their life and they're doing something ordinary, and then suddenly they start realizing that they start realizing what the next plot that's coming up is. They start like falling into something happening. They're like, oh, here's the actual mystery of the arc. You know, I love those aspects. I love, like, they get you intrigued. I actually and almost entirely agree with Miranda on all of these things. I want more of them.
I think for me, one thing I really I've been complaining about Judy Garrick. And I think a key part of Judy Garrick, in addition to just like nuclear familiarizing the Garricks, who I really like, were like people without kids, is that like I don't like superhero families that are just like, this is my super wife, and this I don't like sky high super.
Oh yeah, I hate the Barry Allen family dynamic. I hate the Wally West family dynamic, and also the Superman family dynamic of Superman, he's got a super son, and also now 2 super twins.
But like I think with John, at the very least, John was like Damien, a culmination of like a will they won't they relationship. That like, do I like every John story? No, but it is like kind of like narrative catharsis for what is going on, especially given this was the return of post-crisis Superman, right? I think with with Wally, it's a similar thing to a degree. Like in post-crisis, at the very least, there was like Wally had like a group of people here and like was doing other things, especially because they didn't have the same exact powers, and Linda was still very normal. I think I don't super love that still because of the fact that like very quickly Barry comes in, but like I don't need like the super like spouses. I don't need it. And do I like I was reading on Scott Green Lantern, and I didn't like the spoilers. Johnny being, I just didn't like that there was a Red Lantern in the Golden Age. I don't need the Red Lantern in the Golden Age.
I hate the concept they went for with the Red Lantern. It should have just like I said this before. They should have made it like a Soviet blood magic vampire character instead of just evil Alan Scott?
Like, I think, first of all, I at least me, I'm fully detaching from, that is a good story. You should all read Alan Scott, Green Lantern. That character is a good character. But as far as the superpower heroics go, they kind of make it a little bit better. But for me, one thing that's always been interesting about Alan, especially like certain century, is that there's like this balance of like green energy and occult power. And if you're going to have like this mirror of Alan, it should very much be the occult energy taking wheel. And instead it's like, no, we're just gonna like, it's like 4 points, right? Like you have the green energy, you have the occult, and rather than focusing on this half, we mirrored it the other way, and now it's just red power, which like is also not even like the reverse of green that much. Like
This is the end of this particular episode of Crisis of Infinite Opinions. I have been your host, Honey. You can find me on Twitter at HoneyHam17, on YouTube right here on Off the Shelf, as well as on TikTok on Showcase Comics for You. Miranda, how can they reach you?
Hey, I'm DinoMightyMiranda on TikTok. Dino is in dinosaur, Mighty is in Mighty Mouse Miranda. That's my name. Don't wear it out. I'm your friendly neighborhood amateur Batman historian. Additionally, I have a podcast, The Sidekicks. It releases every single Friday. Me and a friend, we talk about comic books. Feel free to check that out if you have an interest in what I have to say.
Hi, my name is Rena. Talk on. You can figure it out either by the handle, which is Rock Free, no S, that was already taken, Rock are free, or I list down Too Much Alec and AJ, which is the name of the account. Maybe it'll change. Also, I do live streams every Saturday with the Ash Their Fantastic Friends podcast starting at 9 EST. We go for way too long. You can also see the pods on both Twitch and YouTube. And I live with Miranda for time being on Sundays. So
Yes.
follow her account if you want to see
So
more.
far it's been like every other Sunday, and I think that's our sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Knight?
And I am Knight, the Werewolf Teacher. You can find me at Werewolf Teacher on TikTok and Instagram and Threads. I'm not on Twitter and don't want to be. And I am most active on TikTok. Those are really only the others are only space holders for if the government bans it.
Which is, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
I am on Twitter. I'm not going to say I'm active on it, and I'm not telling you what my Twitter is. So find that if you want.
All right. So that was, yes. Hope you all see you again next week.